Canada is holding conservative principles while the Conservatives are going soft on them. We look back to the original premise of why the People's Party started. Bernier said that the Conservative Party was using platitudes, they were using identity politics, they were polling, they were basically trying to just deliver to the public what they thought that they wanted instead of standing for conservative principles. And people that I have talked to, some of them really get it, really love the People's Party. Others say, well, Bernier just left because he was a sore loser. You know, I have come to realize what Bernier was talking about when he said that the Conservative Party was too intellectually and morally corrupt to be reformed. Yes, there has been a divorce in the Conservative family, but the People's Party is its own thing. It's not just drawing people from that were former Conservative voters. It is drawing people who have never voted because it is unique in its character and in its focus, in its stance, and to totally turn around the political correctness that Justin Trudeau has foisted on the Canadian public. We really need to have a People's Party presence. It's going to change the spectrum of debate in this country. If all we have is the Conservatives sitting near the middle, with the NDP, the Greens, the Bloc, and the mainstream media, and the Liberals just trying to drag them in the wrong direction, what are we going to get? But if the Conservatives are outflanked on the right by the People's Party, speaking common sense principles and voicing things that many Canadians believe but have found no public representation of those beliefs, well, in that scenario, we're going to get a lot better. I remember hearing a quote of Mike Harris, who was the Conservative Premier in Ontario in past decades, and he said, when I was pushing for a 5% drop in welfare, I wish there was someone out there pushing for 50. The People's Party is making the stands that need to be made. You know, it's interesting when you look at what happened on the leadership floor when Bernier was winning, and all of a sudden he doesn't win by the thinnest of margins. A lot of that was credited to the people who were benefiting from the dairy quotas, something that in the name of fairness, Bernier said should be abolished. And now we have Conservative leader Andrew Scheer saying that, well, the food guide is wrong. So he's willing to say that the scientists and medical people are putting these things in, and yet it's very apparent that he's doing a nod and some favoritism to the dairy industry that helped get him elected as leader. So I don't know. I think this is politically driven. I don't know if the food guide is ideologically driven, but I can tell you that this picture and this stance is politically driven. And hey, why wouldn't it be? You know, when the Conservatives got elected, and I wanted to have this in this video, and I see it's not here, and I don't have time to put this in right now, but if you look at that iPolitics video, here we go, the cheating party of Canada. When you talk about moral corruptness, there was something fishy going on that floor. You know, there had actually been a motion at the Conservative Convention to have a full audit, a full recount, give it 30 days to make sure everything is good. Apparently it got voted down. When Bernier lost the leadership, he lost by a margin that was less than a very strange discrepancy. Every candidate had had a list of people that were voting in this election for leader, and it had 133,896 people on it. Now, Bernier somehow lost when there was 141,362 votes cast. How were there more votes cast than people available to post them, to make them? That is a almost 7,500 vote discrepancy. That is strange. So some of them said, well, there was 3,000 people that voted in polling stations outside of Toronto and weren't entered into the party's database. Oh, okay, well, there's still a gap here between that 7,500 and 3,000. I mean, this is weird. So, strangely, party director Dustin Van Vogt ordered that all ballots be destroyed immediately after the vote was taken and the results announced. This decisive measure was taken without informing scrutineers. So, the very least we can say is that this process was not done in a way that everyone can respect and know that this was done properly. So, let's start out with the premise that both Bernier and Scheer had put forward when Bernier decided to leave the party. One was that Bernier said that the Conservatives were void of standing on principle. They stood on platitudes instead of principle. And Scheer said, no, we're the ones standing for real conservative values and principles. Well, let's look at Bill C-16. This was the bill that added transgenderism into a protected class of being. And Bernier had voted for this bill, but he talked to Jordan Peterson, and even before before this bill had been passed, Jordan Peterson was already getting letters of censure from the U of T, saying that he has to use these gender pronouns. And Peterson is saying, I should not have to be compelled to confess my belief or my lining up with someone's inward belief of what they think they are, when biological sex says who they are. So Bernier went from voting for it because he wanted all transgender people to be protected to saying he believed this should be rescinded because it was a threat to free speech. Now, after Scheer became leader, Vice magazine talked to him and drew these conclusions, and he's backtracked on at least two of these three. It's almost like they don't want to stand for anything that anyone can say they're, scary about or something. We need people standing for these things. If you look at the reasons why Andrew Scheer initially said that he wanted to stand and give parents some help that were homeschooling or in private schools. School choice is a good thing. So now he's using the language that the trans activists use, saying, oh, binary is bad. Now this may be actually kind of savvy on his part, but what he's saying here in this is that, yes, I voted against Bill C-16, but when they asked whether he would stand against it later, he said, well, he just wouldn't say. And you'll find that in a lot of issues. He said the left can, in the name of tolerance, become intolerant. That's a nod to probably what is a proper stance on this, but no, he didn't say whether he would do anything about this or not. Maxime Bernier is certainly not afraid to speak against transgenderism as a social issue, saying that it's an attack on free speech, parental rights, and that it's not about fighting discrimination anymore. So there's one issue. One of the first candidates that was willing to run for the People's Party was Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson. She tried to run for them in New Westminster, for the Conservatives actually. The Conservatives would not veto the requirement you have to be a member for 6 months. They didn't want her running, so they didn't let her. She tried again later on in Burnaby South for the by-election against Jagmeet Singh. Nope, they wouldn't let her. So she ran as a People's Party candidate, and Bernier stood with her. So he is not afraid to have an outspoken activist against transgender ideology coming to BC schools and transitioning children from one gender to another or one sex to another through hormones and surgery. We cannot say that the same for the Conservatives They are not taking a stand in this issue. There was another lady, Dr. Ann Gillies, who, if I know right, is a child psychologist. She was a nominee for the riding that had been, there was a Conservative candidate in Bruce Grey Owen Sound who was not running again, and so the incumbent was gone. There was a nomination race. So Dr. Gillies had initially been denied that being a candidate because it was not her strong pro-life beliefs that got her blocked. It was pro-traditional marriage and pro-biblical sexuality beliefs. So anyway, the National Council for the Conservatives urged them to let her run. So the campaign said, okay, we'll let her run. And then they seemed to go to work to find some way to disqualify her. Well, she had written a book. It was called Closing the Floodgates in 2017, where she basically cited a lot of scientific evidence and medical studies talking about the harm that the sexual revolution had brought right into transgenderism. And as it says here, homosexuality and transgenderism were obviously significant themes explored in the book. Mostly she cited scientific peer-reviewed research, which irrefutably demonstrates the dramatically high health risks, whether medical or psychological. So Scheer said that the CBC and Toronto Star would go after someone like her, so they did not want her to be able to run. And even though she was way ahead and probably going to win this nomination, they would not let her run. So there's another one gone. Now, let's look at deficits. You know, Scheer has said in the past, when he took the Conservative leadership, that he was going to balance the budget in 2 years. Then he made this excuse later, well, the Liberals messed it up way too much to do. I find many people still believe this. It is not true. And one reason I can tell you it is not true is that the Liberals almost accidentally balanced the budget this last fiscal year, the one that ended March the 31st. In fact, with 1 month to go, they had a surplus of $3.1 billion. So what did they do? They announced $18 billion in new spending so that they could have a $15 billion deficit. They are determined to drive this country into the ground. Absolutely, this budget can be balanced. And you have to know that when we do some of the things the People's Party wants, such as scaling back equalization, if all we did was take equalization from 20 billion down to 5 billion, we've balanced the budget right there. To say it would take 5 years to do that when there's an election every 4, basically Scheer has said there isn't going to be a balanced budget in this election term that you're electing me for. We absolutely need a balanced budget. So Bernier's paraphrasing, we'll balance the budget someday, just like the Liberals, after we bought enough votes to get reelected. And he says, you know, Scheer is doing the same thing that he criticized Trudeau for. Because initially he was saying, hey, Liberals, when are you going to balance the budget? And then later on, well, you know, it's going to be balanced someday. They're saying 5 years now, with an election every 4. Now, because of that, they're backing away from this thing that the Huffington Post or iPolitics or whoever it was we saw earlier, who was it now? Just a recap of all of the things. It was Vice magazine. Vice magazine, remember? It said, oh no, how scary. Homeschooling will be funded. Well, yeah, not anymore. See, he didn't want to stand for anything that could be pinned against him. So he says, for now, it's not on because of budgetary things. So we've shelved it for now. We believe in it, but we're not necessarily going to do anything about it because we can't do anything about it because of this budget. No, you have the power to do it. And the interest payments on 4 years of borrowing are not going to make the difference between whether you can balance the budget or not. Should have had this one earlier, but again, even though It is not an official part of the party platform. Bernier has said that the People's Party and its candidates, its members of parliament, are going to be free to talk about issues of abortion or gender identity. They won't be official party platforms, but they are free to do so. This is quite different from leadership that is silencing and suppressing anyone who could say anything that the politically correct class would go against them for. You know, we've even had, even though Bernier is not, to my knowledge, a person of faith, he has said that it is really too bad that there are so many late-term abortions being paid for by taxpayers for people in Quebec. He says it's such a late term that doctors don't want to do them. So the taxpayer pays for the surgery to get done in the United States. Wow. If only when everyone was waiting in line till they almost died or maybe did die for a Canadian healthcare system to actually fix us, you know, if only they could be paid for to go to the States. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. So Bernier probably made the strongest anti-abortion statement of any political leader in the last 30 years. Because of the legal void in Canada, you're allowed to get an abortion until the last trimester, even without any reasonable motive. My personal view is that at this stage, when the baby is fully developed and viable, this amounts to infanticide. So Scheer, who basically got the leadership on the basis of a pro-life social conservative vote, is the one who is actually trying to quench it. They don't want people talking about this. Deputy Leader, Conservative Leader Lisa Raitt says a Scheer government would oppose moves to reopen divisive debates. So they are. So what Jack Fonseca of Campaign Life says, Scheer says that he would respect the democratic right of backbench MPs to bring forward issues important to them, but also said he would oppose measures or attempts to open the abortion debate. Okay, you can say whatever you want, but you can't do anything about it. Well, that doesn't quite make sense. Now, we've come all the way now to this conversion therapy ban. And conversion therapy is not just turning a gay straight. It is also making a child who is gender confused comfortable in their own body, because you're turning them from a transgender in their own mind and heart to someone who's comfortable in their own gender. Well, that would actually be outlawed. And when we're talking about a ban on conversion therapy, that is included. And that is why an eminent gender identity, gender dysphoria doctor in Toronto, Ken Zucker, lost his job. An investigation happened because he was accused of doing these kinds of therapies. Well, he wasn't set on it, but he said it's far preferable for a child to be comfortable in their own skin than to go through radical hormones and surgeries that never really do take you all the way to being the other sex. And then many people later regret it. So let's not do that. And 88% of the time, that's what happens. They want to ban all those therapies. And the Liberals, in their letter about this and statements about it, talk about it's still happening in dark corners, like church basements. Okay, if you don't see this kind of rhetoric as a threat to religious freedom, it's a well-known aspect of Judeo-Christian teaching that a person who is following Christ or is following God is abstaining from homosexual sex. So if you are going against any kind of influence that would try to steer someone towards living in that way, boy, I don't know how long religious freedom can last. But Andrew Scheer is going to wait and see. Wait and see. Wait and see. Voters, do you want to wait and see? Only to find out maybe he's not going to do anything? Then there was this man, Salem Mansour, someone I have met and know personally, who's an extremely moral person. And you will find some Muslims are very moral people. And he himself has said that radical Islam, Islamicism or Islamism, is a threat to Western society, just like globalism is. Well, they had him as a candidate, the Conservatives did, and then one day, after 9 months as the standing candidate, he was yanked. And he decided later he would run for the People's Party. Thanks to all for love and support. This setback won't derail me to help rescue our Canada from Islamism and globalism. This is a true Canadian, and he's found his home with the People's Party because he was driven out of the Conservative Party as a candidate. And the reason that his candidacy was disallowed, they wouldn't say in an actual, they didn't want any paper trail on it, but Andrew Scheer's campaign manager, apparently, Hamish Marshall, said that this would all be portrayed by the Liberals as Islamophobic and be disruptive to the party's national campaign. Okay, so their accusation is so ridiculous. It's saying a Muslim is Islamophobic, and you can't even stand against that? Does that make any sense? Come on. So what kind of Muslims does Andrew Scheer want to stand with, if not the ones that are against Sharia law? Well, it is with this man here. And this is his name. And by the way, the Conservatives don't even want the rebel to be anywhere in their conventions. Why? Because the Liberals asked them not to. Holy cow. Yeah, the Liberals asked them to way back in 2017, and by now there is not a single Conservative candidate that is allowed to talk to rebel media. It's an order from headquarters. You can't talk to them. Well, hey, probably because they would look foolish trying to defend themselves with some of the things that are going on. Quiggin has said that there's 3 people from Muslim Brotherhood that are running as Conservatives now. You know, one of the things that really got a lot of attention from people about this man that Scheer and Trudeau have been photographed with was that he was giving teachings on when in Islam it's okay to strike your wife. And first of all, you sit them down and have a discussion, and then you refuse to give them sex, and then you strike them. Okay, so I got a link here. If you can look at it, you can look this up. So lately, we've had Laura Lynn Thompson saying, let's have a ban on abortion in the 3rd trimester. Let's put it at 24 weeks. You know, in Western democracies all over the world, it's very common to have a cutoff at 20 weeks or 24 weeks. I think in Sweden it might even be 12 weeks. In some American states, it's become when there's a heartbeat, which is, 6 or 8. Andrew Scheer hasn't signed this ban on late-term abortions. So who's taking a conservative stand? Okay, there was with the Yellow Vest movement, there was a Muslim person talking about them, and he was just nodding to their concerns and supposed concerns about Islamophobia and this sort of thing. We're just not really seeing that stand. And when Michael Cooper, the Conservative MP who spoke against a Muslim guest he tried to blame Conservatives for mass shootings based on the New Zealand event. Michael Cooper spoke out against this and said, here's the guy's manifesto. He said he's not a conservative, but you're blaming all conservatives. You should be ashamed of yourself. And this Michael Cooper, the Edmonton MP, was taken off of the Conservative. Well, he was no longer going to be a member of the Justice Committee, and they even took away all of his testimony. They wiped it from the record. Bernier was the only one left there saying this should not be done. This is 1984. This is George Orwell. History is being changed. It's being struck from the record. And there were no conservatives there to do the media tour or the discussion shows, the panel shows talking about this issue. Amazingly, when there were some guests that the Conservatives called to testify on free speech and whether speaking against transgenderism and the dangers of Islamism was bad. These people were saying, yes, I mean, we should not have human rights tribunals shutting down this kind of speech. The NDP made a motion to shut down the witness's testimony from the video feed, and the Conservatives abstained. So isn't that ironic? The Conservatives stood by while the testimony of John Robson and I think Lindsay Shepherd, and there was another guest who also spoke there, Mark Stein, that wasn't heard. So basically, a speech on free speech was banned. I mean, isn't that a disturbing irony? Wow. Now, my premise to you is that the Conservatives on their own are not going to have the courage necessarily to do what it is that we need a conservative government to do. So look at this on pipelines from January.
Si jamais vous avez, selon les normes fédérales, tout ce qu'il faut, les conditions réunies pour construire un pipeline qui passera au Québec, mais vous n'avez pas l'appui du gouvernement du Québec, le feriez-vous quand même, M. Scheer?
Mais je suis sûr qu'on peut obtenir, on peut trouver le commun.
Okay, I'm not having an internet connection while it was there. Basically, what Scheer said was, we are going to make a deal with Quebec. Bernier said, we'll use the constitutional authority if we have to. That is a strong difference in stance. Bernier is saying, you know, if we can't make a deal, we will build it anyway. We will use Section 92 of the Constitution. Well, guess what? By now, the Conservatives have adopted that as part of their platform. So now they are saying that they are going to invoke constitutional authority. Well, Scheer didn't have that courage before Bernier spoke out so loudly on that issue. And I think that's what needs to happen. Whether it's changing little girls into boys or little boys into girls, whether it's late-term abortions, whether it's using constitutional authority to build a pipeline, what about equalization? The Conservatives have invented the system and indexed and increased for it every year, the system that we have now. Bernier is the only one saying we should scale it back. That would make a big difference for Alberta and Saskatchewan and BC, Newfoundland, Ontario, and it would also do a lot to make people believe in Canada. And Western separatism, that movement would have a lot of the air let out of it, and we could preserve Canada. If you enjoyed this video and you believe that I would be a good candidate because I'm running in Southwest Saskatchewan for Cypress Hills Grasslands, I encourage you to go to my website, leeharding.ca, and you can also find out how to donate to my EDA and through them to my campaign. And I thank you for watching today.